Om Sthapakaya Dharmasya Sarvadharmaswaropine Avatara Varishtaya Ramakrishna Te Namaha. O Ramakrishna, the establisher of the eternal religion, the embodiment of all religions, the best of all incarnations, we salute thee. In the last reading class, we stopped at page number 586 of this book, Ramakrishna the Great Master, Volume 1. We shall continue from there today. We remember that the author was discussing the spiritual mood, the mood of the spiritual teacher in Sri Ramakrishna. So when he was young, how this mood of the spiritual teacher manifested through him, he was discussing. He continues the same subject today. So we shall start. When we study the Master's life, we also find the gradual unfoldment of this mood daily in his life when he was in the state of sadhaka in his youth. And at the end of austere spiritual practices for 12 long years, it became fully manifested in him and cast a halo of naturalness around it. At that time, the ordinary human intellect was at a loss to know which eye consciousness the Master was in any particular moment. And when the mood of the spiritual teacher was manifested in him through his identification with the universal I, but when this mood attained its full development, it is a distinct story and it will be told at its proper place. Now, it is necessary to tell the reader here a little how he behaved on many occasions in his youth at the time of his sadhana when he was beside himself with the divine mood. So he was a spiritual teacher later on, well accomplished, well recognized spiritual teacher. But at his youth, when he was doing these spiritual practices, he was not perfect in that. So how did he behave at that time? How did the spiritual teacher's mood got expressed by him? So we shall see today. We find the first manifestation of the mood of the spiritual teacher during his youth in connection with Rani Rasmani, the foundress of the Kali temple at Dakshineshwar, and her son-in-law Mathurnath. None of us have had the good fortune of seeing either of the two, but from what we have heard from the Master, that is Sri Ramakrishna himself, it is very clear that at the very first sight, a love for the Master grew in their hearts and gradually it assumed unusual depth. It will perhaps appear to our minds to be a fairy tale instead of a fact that man can love an ordinary man so much and have so much reliance on and devotion to that man. For on superficial observation, the Master was then, when he was young, an ordinary, insignificant priest, and they were leaders in society. That means the proprietors of Kali temple, Mathurnath Babu and Rani Rasmani, they were leaders in society, great in wealth, great in respect, learning and intelligence, though not of a high caste. Now, the Master had a strange nature from his childhood. Wealth, respect, learning, intelligence, big titles and appellations at the end of one's name, because of which people regard one as great, were never held in great regard by him. It was a peculiar nature. All the people, they respected these things, name, fame, money, etc. But Sri Ramakrishna did not. The master used to say, when one ascends the monument, that is the Octorloni monument in Calcutta, it is a monument, a long, tall tower, so you can climb to the top of it and have a big look at the whole city of Calcutta. The 3 or 4-story buildings, the tall trees and the grass growing low on the ground all look alike. The grass and the 4 or 5-story buildings, so much of difference between them when you are on the ground. But when you go to the high level of the Octorloni monument, it is too high. From there, all look as if they are all in one level. So this example is given to say why Sri Ramakrishna could see everybody from a common view. He would not respect a person just for a title or for some money with him. We also find that from his childhood, the master's mind generally dwelt on such a high plane because of his devotion to truth and love of God, that from there differences in wealth, respect, learning, etc., on account of which we get puffed up, and the vast earth appears to us to be but a saucer or not seen. So a person who respects only the character, the love of God, etc., as the real things, he will not pay any heed to the other things other than them. Or the master's mind would always discriminate before undertaking anything and arrive at a definite conclusion by deep thinking as to why a thing should be done, where the relation with a particular person would ultimately lead, and where it had led others under similar conditions. So he was a very discriminative person. Therefore, those things could by no manner of means hide their purpose and final development from him under a charming guise and deflect him from the right course, even for a short time. That means he was not deluded by these external things. He had a very deep insight into the things. The reader may say, but this kind of discriminating intellect will bring first of all the defects of all things before the eyes and paralyze all urge for activity and make all undertakings impossible. So this is the objection. So the author says, it is exactly so. If the intellect were not purified before and freed from desires, and if it were not turned to the high ideal of the realization of God, it would undoubtedly render man aimless and inactive and sometimes self-willed and reckless. If, on the contrary, the intellect is tuned or turned to purity and high ideals, it alone probes all things to the very bottom and finds the defects, thereby leading man quickly forward along the path to realization of God. Immediately when the defects are seen, then one is deflected from it. One gives up that path and takes the right path of God. So though we may not be able to do work, but we are only avoiding bad work. That is no work at all. That is only dangerous. That is not producing the wanted results. Therefore, not to do those work itself is a merit. That is a good thing, virtue. So, Sri Ramakrishna did not indulge in all sorts of work. It was a virtue with him. God, therefore, Sri Krishna in the Gita has asked only men of such faith and devotion only to find out the painful evils inherent in birth, death, decrepitude and disease, and thereby attain dispassion. Even Sri Krishna says in the Gita, so you must be discriminative. Find faults with your own life. There is inherent fault in the life because it is a short-lived one and some of the imperfections are there. Don't cling on to this physical life. That was the message of Krishna. Let us observe how well developed was that faculty of finding the hollowness of worldly things in the master's character from his childhood. Admitted into school, he was not attracted by such titles as Tarkalankara or Vidyavagisha. These were all different titles given to the scholars in Sanskrit studies by name and fame, but found out instead that these big Tarkamagishas and Nyaya Chanchus were dancing attendants at the doors of the rich, parading their learning by long quotations from Nyaya and Vedanta for the bundling of rice and plantain, rice and banana. The pujaris, the priests, are given as a donation or as gift lot of rice, lot of fruits, including banana. So to take that one, they were all exhibiting their great scholarship. So that means they are selling an invaluable knowledge for these worthless things, for their mere livelihood. Having got married, he was not at all attracted by worldly pleasures and amusements. So he kept up this mood even after he was married. It is usual when young people are there without any encumbrance of marriage, they act very daringly, recklessly also. But Sri Ramakrishna was daring and reckless in this respect, even after his marriage. But found out instead the evils in committing oneself once for all to worldly life in order to have an ephemeral, uncertain happiness, and in running after money by increasing one's wants. So, even after marriage, he kept to a very simple life so that his wants are not multiplied. It is wants that creates needs. Want and need are the same. So, the wants that creates our desires. So, this want is to be fulfilled when you think it is a desire. So, more the wants, more desires to be fulfilled. So, desires to be fulfilled, then you have to go and cringe before others. You become a slave. You are no more a free man. This was Sri Ramakrishna's argument. Seeing that everything in the world could be achieved and every position gained by money, he was not thereby induced to devote himself, heart and soul, to the earning of money, but found out instead that mere rice, pulses, cloth, brick, earth, wood, etc. That means something about the food, something about the raiment, something about the shelter, so etc. might be had for money, but not the realization of God. His reasoning was, what will you do with money? Only these three things you can get: food, raiment and shelter. Beyond that, it cannot give you anything higher. But what he wanted was the realization of God, which is infinite joy, infinite life, infinite knowledge, infinite power. So he wanted that. He wanted infinite, not the finite. And again, he was not attracted towards acquiring name and fame as a man of clarity, a philanthropist, etc. That means who take titles, that is a great philanthropist or a man of scholarship, etc. But found out instead that as a result of lifelong efforts, there might be established at the most a few free schools, a few charitable dispensaries, or a few rest houses, and that then would follow death, when the philanthropist would leave the world behind in as much want and joylessness as before. So many of the philanthropists and many of the scholars who go for name and fame, they feel rather disappointed when they reach the end of their life, when they are in front of death. So they feel their life has been wasted, because nothing of what they have achieved is going to be with them or help them in their further living of their spiritual life in another body. Therefore, they will all be disappointed. And the same was the spirit manifested regarding everything else. So Sri Ramakrishna considered everything in this world is ephemeral, and that will end up in disappointment and depression. So he did not want to get into that state. Rather, go for the spiritual quest, which will always be satisfying, make your life feel self-fulfilled. So that was Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy about life. Therefore, it was very, very difficult for ordinary men, especially when the people proud of their learning and wealth, to rightly recognize and understand the master who had such a peculiar nature. People thought it was peculiar, but he was the right thinking person, a person who thought deeply about life. For as nobody is plain with them, they lose very often the power of listening to straightforward talks on account of their purse-proud nature and the public honor accorded to them. So worldly people, they could not appreciate his nature of discrimination. So it is not at all surprising that, unable to recognize him, estimate him, they would take him to be a vulgar, mad or proud person. It therefore adds to our surprise to see Rani Rasmani's and Mathuranath's love and reverence for him. It seems to us that it was a unique stroke of good fortune that by the grace of God, not only did they keep intact their first love for him, but surrendered themselves entirely at his holy feet when they were being daily acquainted with his divine mood as a spiritual teacher. So their first love, it never waned. It went on waxing until they completely surrendered themselves to him, thinking that he was the greatest spiritual teacher. Otherwise, it would not have been easy for Rani Rasmani and Mathur Babu to give up egoism and pride of wealth and contract a love for the master at the first sight and maintain and develop it to the last to a surprising degree. The more so as the master was so queer and old-fashioned. For example, he went without food on the day of the dedication ceremony of the Kali temple at Dakshineshwar. All of us know his brother himself dedicated the temple and took up the work of the priest there, offered food. He himself prepared the food for the deity. With all that, Sri Ramakrishna did not consider it as purest food, because the temple belonged to Rani Rasmani and Mathuranath Babu, who were Shudras, who were low caste. Therefore, he would not take food. See, so much of orthodoxy was there in him. So, and later when he had to stay in the temple, he would day after day rather do his own cooking on the river bank of the provisions supplied from the temple stores. So he did not give up this unusual orthodoxy so easily. He came, stayed on the banks of Ganga near the temple along with his brother, but even then he would not take the prasad or the sacraments from the temple. He would cook himself, taking some rice and dal, etc., from the stores of the temple. So his orthodoxy was so strong. That means he was a very queer person, even for such devoted persons like Rani Rasmani and Mathuranath Babu. So then partake of the food offered to the deity and sanctified by her, all because the cooked food belonged to the low caste people, which, as he thought, would pollute him. Though his own brother had performed the worship, offered the food, and partaken of the prasada. With all that, his way of thinking and holding on to his convictions, that is the point we have to note. If he thought one thing as right and he held on to it until it was proved that it was wrong, that he was wrong. So tremendous tenacity was there, tenacity of conviction. So that is how he held on to his orthodoxy. Mathur's love and vague admiration for the master led him to seek an opportunity to appoint him as a priest of the Mother Kali. But the eccentric master avoided talking with the worldly Mathur. You see, people were very eager to get an employment under a big zamindar like Mathur. But he avoided meeting Mathur Babu because he wanted to offer him the post of a priest. So it was really eccentric. Avoided talking with the worldly Mathur. Their latter repeated attempts notwithstanding. Is it not extraordinary that under such circumstances the love of Mathur and the Rani went on steadily increasing? The master had by now got married. He was in the heyday of his youth. He had returned to Dakshineshwar after his marriage and had taken charge of the worship of Kali, the Divine Mother. And as soon as he had done so, the divine madness was again upon him. Usually they say that if somebody is eccentric, they say it will all be cured by marriage and the responsibilities that come after that. But it did not come to happen in the case of Sri Ramakrishna. So they married him so that his eccentricity should go. But the eccentricity did not leave him. What they consider as eccentricity, that is madness of God, it increased. That is what is being explained. In his agony at not having realized God, he rolled on the ground restlessly and rubbed his face mercilessly against the ground, crying piteously all the while, "Mother, Mother." People would gather round him in multitudes and in sympathy would say, "Ah, the poor man must be suffering from a terrible colic. Nothing else can make one so restless." And sometimes he became motionless at the time of worship, on placing all the flowers for worship on his own head. And again sometimes, like one mad, he went on singing for a long time the songs composed by the sadhakas. At other times, however, when he was somewhat in the normal mood, he behaved with all as he should. But when meditating on the Divine Mother, such ecstasies would come, not once or twice, but very often, not in small doses, but in overwhelming intensity. Then he would have no consciousness of the surroundings, nor hear anybody's words, nor reply to anybody. But even during these times, people felt very often the exquisite beauty of his divine nature. For even then, if anybody requested him to sing a song or two on the Mother, he would begin immediately to sing in his exquisitely sweet voice, and filled with the spirit of the song, would lose himself in it. You see, this particular thing, the devotion to God, was extraordinary. So because of that one, he was not normal in all other matters. That's why people called him his eccentric. Now, not only the lower officers, but the cashier, the chief officer of the temple, brought many tales the master's improper and unceremonious actions to the ears of Rani Rasmani and Mathur Babu. It was so reported the junior Bhattacharya is ruining everything. The mother's worship and the offering of food to her was not done properly. Can the mother accept anything that is done so improperly? They complained. But the desired effect was not produced. They wanted him to be dismissed, but Mathur Babu or Rasmani, they never did it. For Mathur Babu used now and then to come suddenly to the temple without informing anybody and remaining unobserved, noticed the longing devotional behavior of the master and his affectionate childlike importunities to the Divine Mother during the worship, shedding tears of joy and devotion. Mathur Babu personally came to visit and see for himself the fact, and when he saw, it was genuine devotion. It was nothing eccentric or anything improper. He then ordered the office of the temple, "You shall not obstruct the junior Bhattacharya," it is junior priest, Sri Ramakrishna, "or find fault with him in anything he may do. You shall inform me first and then act as I order." So he issued this order. That means he appreciates the present situation. So all were disappointed for their complaint. Rani Rasmani also would come from time to time to the temple and become so charmed with the floral decoration of the mother and with the songs of the mother's name and glory sung by the master in his exquisitely sweet voice, that whenever she came to the Kali temple, she would call the junior Bhattacharya to her and request him to sing her a few songs. The master also completely forgot that he was singing for any mortal, and filled with the spirit of songs, went on singing as if he was doing it for the Divine Mother herself. Usually such great people, they never sing for human beings. They sing only for God, especially the spiritually great people. They do everything for sake of God. They do not want to please any man. So when Rani Rasmani would ask, but the junior Bhattacharya, the junior priest, that was Sri Ramakrishna, to sing a few songs, he never thought he was singing it to her. She is asking me to sing for mother. I will sing for mother. So with the spirit, that spirit of singing to mother, he started singing and would go on singing one after another. Thus days were rolling on. As in the big household of the world, so in the small one in the temple, all were busy with their own affairs, relieving the humdrum monotony of their lives by indulging in such piquant subjects as speaking ill of others and carrying and inventing tales during their little leisure they would snatch from looking after their worldly affairs and thinking about their own selfish interests. These were the things that engaged the minds of the common people around Sri Ramakrishna. Therefore, who was there to notice what changes were being brought about in the mind of the junior Bhattacharya on account of his love of God? Nobody was noticing the tremendous progress the junior Bhattacharya was making in spiritual world. He is a mad fellow. The Babus, that is the proprietors, have somehow taken a fancy to him. And that is why he still retains the job. But how long can he retain it? He is sure to commit some strange act one day and will be driven away. Is there any certainty about the temper of the big folk? It takes very little time to please them or to displease them. That was how they reconciled themselves. Right now, we were not able to dismiss him or get him dismissed, but someday he will be dismissed, certainly. So they were sure that he was eccentric, he could not continue there. This was the kind of talk that sometimes went on among the officers around him. The master's nephew and attendant Hriday had joined him there by that time. In the meanwhile, he had one companion of his own age almost, from his own village, with whom he was very intimate from childhood, that was Hriday. So he came and joined him. One day, Rani Rasmani came to the temple. All the officers were very, very busy. The shirkers too were that day attending their duties very carefully. So, after taking her bath in the Ganga, the Rani went to the Kali temple. The worship and the dressing up of the divine Kali were then finished. The Rani saluted the mother and sat down on a seat near the holy image within the temple to perform her daily worship. She saw the junior Bhattacharya near and requested him to sing mother's name. The master also sat down near the Rani and, filled with devotional emotions, began to sing the songs of Ram Prasad, Kamalakanta and other mystics. She was listening to these songs while performing worship, japa, etc. This went on for some time, but the master suddenly got annoyed and stopped singing and sharply exclaimed in a harsh tone, "That thought alone? That thought even here?" Saying so, he immediately struck the tender person of the Rani with the palm of his hand. The master was in that very mood now in which a father becomes angry and punishes his child on seeing something wrong in its conduct. But who understood that? So this is a great incident in the life of Ram Rasmani and of Sri Ramakrishna also, the details of which we shall take up in our next reading class. Till then, we stop here. Niranjanam nityam anantarupam bhaktanukampadhrita vigraham vai Ishavataram paramesha Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namama. O Ramakrishna, the taintless one, the eternal one, the one with infinite forms, the one who has taken a form for the sake of the devotees, the one who is the incarnate Supreme Soul, and the one who is the adorable Lord of all, we salute, bowing our heads before Thee.